I have to say that one thing that I think that you need as an artist, and this doesn't matter if you're, it doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter like if you're a man or a woman or anything, you need grit. You need to be able to take that and be like, okay, cool. They just said they're not going to hire me because I'm a woman. I'm going to apply to 5 more places. I'm going to go home. I'm going to work on a portfolio piece. I'm going to be better. You don't get to be the gatekeeper. You don't get to tell me that I'm not allowed to have this career, which I want to have.
Hello, Artist World. My name is Sparrow. I am a studio assistant for Rose, and I've done some work for Sarah. Just graduated from college, and today I'm going to be interviewing both Rose and Sarah. So would you both like to introduce yourself?
My name is Sarah Dahlinger. I am a creature concept sculptor and illustrator. I live in New Hampshire. I've been making art professionally since 2006. And I've been a freelancer since 2016. So, but I'm currently working on making my own brand. So I'm currently in the process of becoming like a truly independent artist. And my own brand is Astra Fauna. And I am just about to release a book called Astra Fauna Expeditions, and it'll be like the first thing in that brand. But I suppose what I'm known for is unique creature concepts that are grounded in actual biology and anatomy. And that's what I focus on. And I primarily work in ZBrush and Photoshop.
Most of you already know me since you are on my channel, but I'm Rose Catherine Khan. I'm a professional fantasy illustrator. I'm originally from Rochester, New York, and within the last year, I moved to Orlando, Florida, like the Disney Universal theme park bubble that is Central Florida. I'm primarily known for my puzzle designs. This year, I completed my 20th puzzle design. I'm with company, yeah, cheer for me. My work is with companies like Buffalo Games and Ravensburger and White Mountain Puzzles, and I'm also the creator of Centuria, and that we'll be talking about that more today, my fantasy novel series. But I've been a graphic designer and illustrator since also 2006, because that's when I graduated with my illustration degree, like many years ago. And I worked as a graphic designer for a while, worked as a college professor, and I just kind of transitioned over to fantasy art, which is where that's where my love lies, basically anything with dragons and unicorns and imaginary creatures in just elaborate worlds.
So because we're on Rose's channel, we've obviously heard a lot about Centuria already, but what we haven't heard about is Sarah's Kickstarter with Astra Fauna, or is it Astra Fauna?
Astra Fauna. Yep.
Okay, yep. Good. So Astra Fauna, can you, Sarah, tell us a little bit about what Astra Fauna is?
Astra Fauna Expeditions is I like to call it a story-filled art book. So it has 5 chapters, and each chapter is a short story. And it changes, each chapter follows a new scientist character and the adventures that they go on. And it's from their point of view. So the stories are very wide reaching. So, we have some kind of lighthearted space adventures to journeys of self-discovery to like journeys of dealing with things like anxiety or depression. So it's a very large arc of the type of stories that you're going to get in Astra Fauna. And then additionally, it's an art book. It has 230 plus images. I stopped counting at 230.
Holy cow, girl, that is a lot of work.
It's a lot of drawing. Yeah.
Holy cow. And there's a lot of full color art in there too, as well as sketches, right?
Yes.
Combination.
Yeah, definitely. It's like basically every chapter is going to kind of have like a big fancy illustration, and then it's like kind of all the concept art or all the drawings and stuff like that that goes into like kind of the promo piece of that creature, I suppose. And let's see. Oh yeah, so additionally to that, because I do gaming as well, so I made system neutral stat blocks for every creature and NPC in it, and those are already made. The last bit, which I'm really proud of, is I added accessibility features to the book as well. So the book comes standard with an audiobook, a text transcript, and a text transcript in open dyslexic font. So I wanted to make it, because this book can be used as sort of like a lore book or a launching point to like dovetail Astra Fauna into a previous homebrew RPG campaign, like TTRPG campaign. I wanted it so like everyone could understand and sort of play in the world and experience the world, and then use it as they wish. And I mean, if you want to, you can just read the stories, enjoy the stories. I would say it's young adult to adult. And it's a quick read, or you can look at the pictures and enjoy it as an art book. And also, if you wanted to kind of, send your adventurers on something unique that they haven't seen, that isn't in any of the core books, you can dovetail that into what you're doing with your own campaigns.
What excited me about your project when I first heard about it is like, so when I was a kid, I loved art books. Like I'd go to like Borders or Barnes and Nobles, and I would pick up those art books, and I'd pick up things for like video games and worlds that I had to like know. Like I remember getting the book for like Final Fantasy. I'd never played Final Fantasy before, but because the art book was so pretty and it had the sketches and it just like pulled me in. So when I heard about your project, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that just sounds fun. Like there's just this part of me that I know a lot of other individuals, especially people who are into art or sci-fi and fantasy and gaming, like just the ability to like explore new worlds visually is it's just inherently fun.
I was the same way. I bought the D&D monster manual before I could ever play Dungeons and Dragons, like because I just for the art. The same thing for Final Fantasy. Yep, definitely. Like all the art of Star Wars, everything. So I'm a firm believer in make a book or a product that your 12-year-old self would have loved to have, and that's largely what Astra Fauna is.
Looking at your Kickstarter, you haven't, as of the recording, you have not actually launched the Kickstarter. You have
we're officially 1 week out. 1 week out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're 1 week away. I know you have like over 300 people following the Kickstarter, which is awesome. And from what I hear is a good indicator that you will have success, because you already have these people like, okay, ready to support you right from the get-go, right from day one. How the heck did you get those 300 people? Like, because that is not an easy marketing task, Right. So where did they come from?
So the funny thing is it started off with an accident, and it started off with, I guess, me being accidentally smart. And then it turned into just consistent grind. So I was talking to Doug Hoppus, who does Shadow Myths, who I would recommend everyone follow. He's like brilliant with art business. And he said, I've been working with him, and he was like, I suggest that you start sending out your mailing list newsletter more often. I was like, okay, that's pretty good advice. And the only thing on my mind at the time was getting the Kickstarter set up. So because I've set up my Squarespace shop, Shopify shop, Patreon, etc. I'm like, all I probably need is a skeleton, so I can just have a link so I can send to people to be like, oh yeah, look, it's going to happen. And I knew that Kickstarter could generate a preview link. What I didn't realize is that it's apparently quite common. And this is my first Kickstarter, so I was going in very fresh and green, and I didn't kind of have any preconceived notions. So apparently it's really common for people to do the entire back end, fill out the Kickstarter perfectly, and then they click the can I get my preview link? And then Kickstarter reviews the whole thing and does that. So me, unknowing, I put in one reward, one picture, a little bit of text, and I barely filled out the, just the skeleton. And I was like, okay, cool. It said, get a preview link. So I did. And it got approved within like a minute, because I think it was like pretty much nothing in the Kickstarter. And then it sent me like a little note. I forget where it appears. And it was something like, if you get 10 people to follow this Kickstarter, it will be publicly displayed on the Kickstarter page. Until you get those 10, it's hidden. So
I remember you posted that to Facebook. Like I remember
exactly.
that day where you were like, hey guys, I just need 10 people to follow. And I think I followed just because I was like, oh, I'm your friend, I'm going to help you out. Let me do the follow. But okay, go on with your story.
Right. Exactly. So that's what I did. I went to Facebook and I went to like, I've got a group chat with my family, and I just wanted to get 10 people. I was like, okay, guys, I just want this to be public. So if someone is browsing Kickstarter, as people do, I want them to possibly be able to find it. And I got 100 people within like 2 days, I think. And then I would say the first 150 was really, really easy. It's just, those are the people who frequently interact with me, like on Facebook and Twitter. Like we talk all the time. Those are the ones that the algorithm keeps showing, and then after that, and this is probably because I have experience like generating interest with my Patreon, it's like you kind of have to keep the snowball rolling so it gets bigger and bigger. So that's when you start doing the posts everywhere that you can think about. And, anytime you have a milestone, like, oh, we're 10 people away from 200. Oh, we're 5 people away from 230. Oh, we're, one person away from 300. And you start doing that very, very regularly. Like make up a reason to do it. Like it doesn't have to be 5. Like you can just be like, oh, we're 7 people away from 280.
That is so smart, because like I saw when you were posting, because I only follow you on Facebook. Like I'm not aware of your Twitter. I don't even think I'm on your mailing list. I'm not on your Patreon. What a wonderful friend I am. But I did see it on Facebook, and I did, like, it makes me want to root for you, because everybody, like, we're all completionists at heart, and so like it's like, I want you to hit 200, like, right, why, but I'm rooting for you, just
and
because.
that's the momentum smart. You have to maintain. Like you have to keep it fresh, and you have to and it's true, it's like everyone wants to get the next number bracket. So and also the other thing too, and I got this advice years and years ago, is you have to make it kind of like it's not only a me thing, because like I'm not funding the Kickstarter by myself. So you very much so have to be like, we're doing this together, because it's true. It's like, like I made a thing, but like without everyone else, it's not even going to be a thing. So I prefer making the dialogue very much so like we're a team. Like this is years ago, I got the advice to decide who you were going to be online, like what sort of personality you have, like how you'll interact with the other people online. So very early on, when I started my freelance career, I decided that everyone who was my friend online was actually on my soccer team. Because as a kid, I was like, okay, so, I understand my teammates, we're on the soccer team together. I understand how to interact with that. So I just decided everyone who follows me on socials is on my soccer team. And so that's how I interact with it. So it's always like a team venture. So it's really, for me, I guess it's natural and kind of easy to be like, come on, team, we're almost at 250. Come on, team, we're almost at 280. And you keep it going.
I love that idea of a team. I think that's really, really important on social media, because it's easy to feel like, oh, it's me and then my fans, or it's me and then other people. But bringing everything together is a great way to then have a lot more engagement.
To me, it seems it's I don't want like servants, like I don't want someone to be like, oh, Sarah's so cool, I kind of want us to be like, we're all in this together, we're all gonna win together. In general, we don't lose together. In general, the losing is just me, but
it's okay, guys, I'll lose for all of us.
I got it. Like, that is a bit how it works, but if we win, we all win together, and that's the goal.
That's awesome. Oh, I love that.
World building as a whole is going to be the focus of this video today, because you guys both have done so much world building for your respective worlds and are very successful at it. And people like me, who are more new to this or younger or more inexperienced, would love to hear more about how you've gone about creating these crazy different worlds. And you have different approaches, and there are areas where your world building overlaps. So I'm going to have us dig into that today. So first off, let's talk about your 2 universes. One, Astra Fauna, is sci-fi. One, Centuria, is fantasy. So let's get into the details of those 2 universes. How would you describe them?
Centuria is fantasy. It's specifically portal fantasy, which, if you're not familiar with the term, it's basically like a world like Narnia, in which you have real world, magical portal thing goes to fantasy world. So the real world aspect of Centuria, it is set in the modern day. It is set specifically in a suburban area of Pennsylvania called Autumn Valley, and it centers around a high school student. Now, the fantasy aspect, at a first glance, it looks like kind of a 1900s steampunk era world with magic. But then as you start to delve into the story, you find out that this is once a technologically advanced world, but then 100 years prior to the start of the story, there was a really big war that kind of wiped out their infrastructure. And the really weird thing that happened is after the war, there was a government mandate not to rebuild, and that technology and anything specifically with electricity is seen as not acceptable for public usage. So you're not allowed to have like a flashlight out on the streets, or you could get into some serious trouble. Now, of course, because Centuria is a world with all these portals that lead to Earth and lots of people who end up secretly traveling between them, you do end up with Earth technology permeating, especially like quiet, secret social circles. And there ends up becoming kind of this kind of fangirling out over any sort of tech or anything from Earth, like a package of like Oreo cookies is like the most exciting thing ever, because it comes through Earth. So you have this weird sort of hero worship that happens, like, ooh, that Earth world, that mystical Earth world. And so that's basically the setup of Centuria. So I get to play between those two aspects.
It's pretty cool. It's almost like you've got a little bit of a blend too. Like your fantasy, but you have like a little spice of sci-fi there, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, I love sci-fi. Like I was such a big science fiction fan when I was a teenager, and I just kind of fell into fantasy, which is why I'm like so interested in your work, Sarah, because I do love those like sci-fi elements. So yeah,
that's
let's tell us about Astra Fauna.
That's super funny because I was the reverse. As a teen and as a like a young adult, I was more fantasy, and I like couldn't be bothered with sci-fi. And then as I started to get more and more into my love of creature design, it sort of went in a more sci-fi kind of branch, because like I wanted to do stuff that was like not already done. So please, I am not putting anyone's work down at all, but like, you know, dragons and unicorns and werewolves and all that stuff, like that's already been done. And I love dragons, unicorns, and werewolves, but I was looking to go into a more of like a hardcore creature design aspect. So like, you know, completely weird, completely new sort of creatures, and the sci-fi setting sort of lends itself to that. And I do say that it's interesting that you can sort of make like a sci-fi dragon that's a little bit like different, so there is a bit of a gray area there too, but one of the reasons that actually is the big driving factor as to why Astra Fauna is a sci-fi world is it's very much creature design centric. So a lot of times I let sort of the creatures drive the ship a little bit and sort of just fill in the blanks here and there for as far as storytelling. It's funny because my first book that I wrote, it was very much so like, you know, I wrote the story 100%. It was clearly done. I did the editors and everything, and then I illustrated it after. And that was a historical fiction. For this one, this is my second major book project. It sort of was like I would make the ecosystem roughly. I would fill in the spots of the ecosystem I wanted to fill in, and then I would make the story around it with the main scientist protagonist character and their like personal quirks or flaws.
Can I pause you right there? Because I am unfamiliar with this other book project that you had going. So can you give us like a little backstory? When was that? Yeah, and is it available on Amazon? Like what tell us about it.
The first book that I did, I want to say I think I self-published that in like 2015-ish, maybe 2017-ish. It was called Seen and Unseen. It's a neat book. It's not available anywhere now. It's currently out of print because my printer discontinued it or something. So we're working on that. But anyways, it was a historical fiction. It was based around the 1911 Smithsonian survey. this actually really did happen. The Smithsonian sent a bunch of scientists to Panama before we cut the canal through to see how it would affect the nature and the ecosystem there. And my historical fiction is basically what happens if they went there, were doing the scientific survey for the Smithsonian, and accidentally discovered monsters in the forests of Panama. And the really, really fun thing about it was I actually did contact the Smithsonian, and they're super cool about that sort of thing. So I was like, I'm featuring this guy named Sam Hildebrand, and he was a real scientist that worked for you. And they're like, oh, yeah, we have a book on him and his, expedition and his findings and everything, and we can send it to you. And they were really great about it. Yeah. And I actually did go to Panama. I didn't go to Panama. Yeah, I did. Yeah,
I did. Is so cool. Oh my gosh.
It was wonderful. I traveled there because my fiance had always wanted to go. His maybe great grandfather had worked on the canal, and so he wanted to go see the canal. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's go. And then I went. I had an amazing time. Like, I would recommend Panama to anyone who wants to go visit. A ton of cool history, awesome rainforests, and that was such an awesome thing. And then I was sort of working at the time with the Oatley Academy and the Storyteller Summit, and they're like, oh, you should develop a personal project. And I was like, well, I just went to Panama and I have all these awesome, stories that I could tell, and it all kind of mushed together into that book. So that was my first book. And Astra Fauna is my second book, which is bigger than my first book, and definitely way more sci-fi.
So you both have created these crazy, intense, complex, vibrant worlds, and clearly have so much detail, and you've been at it for some time. And I'm curious, where did you get your inspirations to start this?
For me, when I make creatures, all my inspiration in generally is the saying form follows function. So I would decide what I needed to have happen, and then I would make a creature that could fill that need, try and make it visually interesting. And then in terms of the story element for Astra Fauna in general, I would make the creatures, and I would have the scientist character, and then it was almost like a connect the dot sort of thing. I would see how I could weave a story amongst those four aspects, and then I would type that up and put it in there. And of course, this is actually ties into the Panama book that I did. All my creatures have like little field notes next to them. So the book, you'll have a picture of a creature, like a close-up of a foot or something, or some anatomy, and it'll have like little field notes from the scientists and everything, because that's a nerdy thing that I love doing. And but yeah, I get a ton of inspiration from just the natural world, animal documentaries. I watch so many animal documentaries, and anatomy and studying like and that. And then of course, I'm a nerd. Like I game, I watch fantasy stuff and everything like that, and you can kind of pull it all in.
Yeah, that's something
Cool.
I really enjoy about your character creation, because I also, whenever I'm creating characters, I love coming at it from a biological standpoint and seeing your characters. Even when I was going through and just like doing data entry and checking them all out, I was like, not only are these characters cool, but they make so much sense. And that makes me very, very pleased when that's appealing to the more biological scientific community that's going to be consuming this book. So
it's really, really important to me. It's like I kind of am a little salty about like fantasy creatures that don't make anatomical sense, or even sci-fi creatures that don't make anatomical sense. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is like throwing in extra joints for no reason. Because like if you think about like a predator in the wild, so if you're like a tiger, if you gave him an extra knee, and now he's got two knees for no reason, and he breaks one knee, then he can't hunt, then he's going to die. So I was like, why would you add in an extra potential weak point into that creature's anatomy? So everything needs to make sense. Like you can't just have it because it like looks cool or is an alien, or it's like you need to kind of have like if you can have the extra knee makes sense, I'm cool with it. And honestly, like really, like if you want to rubber science it and be like, yeah, because they use it to wrap around trees and get birds, sure, fine, just explain it. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything needs to actually make sense and work.
So with Centuria, I've been working on it for a very long time. So I started that when I was a teenager, and originally I was inspired by Beauty and the Beast, and I took that and I combined it with some actual life trauma that happened, and I like mushed it together, and that's when the original story emerged. But over the past 2 decades almost, I've been slowly building out the world. And what you said about like you have to have a reason for the thing, that is definitely completely permeated everything that I do with Centuria, because I've been told that it's kind of realistic fantasy. It's kind of like a gritty, beat up world to a certain extent. But like, for example, with my creature development, one of the main species that we have are like bicorns. So I took the idea of a unicorn. These aren't like talking magical creatures. They're very much horse-like, and it comes from the fact that I used to ride. And when I started riding, I was in my 20s. So I was like one of those kids that I grew up, I like loved horses. I want to own a horse. It's going to be a wonderful experience. And then I started riding, and then I learned, hey, riding is difficult. And horses can sometimes be jerks, for lack of a better term. Like they have very strong personalities. And once I learned this, then that aspect came through with bicorns. So I decided, you know what, these guys are aggressive. They're not quite herd animals. They're omnivorous. And I'm like, okay, why are they omnivorous? And I'm like, maybe they evolved in the northern lands where there was a food scarcity. And in order for the bicorn species to survive, they started eating grubs, which turned into rodents and other small creatures. So then I completely changed. So now we have, and then I also added, you know, maybe since, you know, actual horses, their vision isn't all that fantastic. So I was like, oh, you know, it'd be cool if these guys could have night vision, because, well, you know, one of my pet peeves is when I'm watching fantasy and you have a character riding a horse through the middle of the night, through the forest in the darkness. I'm like, no, you're going to break your horse's leg. Like, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. So that's why I added that aspect of, okay, so now they have evolved night vision in addition to being aggressive and omnivorous and not quite their herd cousins, basically, that the horses. So like, that's how I evolved the bicorns. And a lot of my other species, I take that same aspect. I don't think I drill down as technical as you do, Sarah, but I think also with Centuria, my first focus was the story. So I've written 3 novels, and I'm really focused, I think, on the human characters and the human character conflict. And when I start to write, I actually start with just literally dialogues between the 2 characters, and it's always a conflict. So and the conflict can be happening literally anywhere, as long as it's the conflict. And in my head, I have the broader storyline. I know how these characters interact. So I start with the conflict with each scene, and then the environment around them starts to build out. And as the environment around them starts to build out, then I start to more fully develop and flesh out the creatures and the landscapes. And a lot of that comes from just everyday life. Like I had a scene that happened on a mountain in the 3rd novel, and I wrote the scene out completely. And then luckily that summer, we happened to go to a wedding in the Rocky Mountains. And once I was there, like literally, it was like this beautiful YMCA camp in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, whoa, I did not realize the vegetation was so sparse and almost like desert-like when you get this far up, and that it gets kind of cold. And then they have all these different species that I hadn't thought about, like bears. Bears are a big deal up there. And then, so those aspects then wove into the writing. And then I made a more believable setting for the mountain environment. And that just keeps happening again and again. I plagiarize the real world and bring it into the story. And I think that all good sci-fi and fantasy does that to a certain extent.
Yeah, big time. I love plagiarize the real world. That's so good. That's so true.
For both of you in world building, you're not only writers, but you're artists. I'm interested in which came first for both of you. And Rose, you can go first. Were you an artist first or a writer?
Both. So when I was younger, when I was a teenager, I was constantly writing and drawing. And what would happen is I would sit down and I would do a character portrait. And as I was drawing, a character portrait on some printer paper, it would be almost like the character would tell me their story as I was drawing. And like, this is actually a very common thing. So I'm going to put on my art teacher cap for 2 seconds here, because I have a background. I have a master's degree in K-12 art education. And there is in one of the developmental aspects of as a child is learning how to do art, there is actually a developmental phase typically between the ages of like 5 and 10, where when a child is drawing, like they're drawing two characters battling on the page. In the child's mind, those characters are actually battling on the page, and it's an active experience. It's not about like, let's do light and color and shadow. It's like, no, there are two monsters and they're on the page, and there's like a physical aspect. So I would do that like throughout my teenage years. In my mind, I'm like, whatever was happening on the page, there would be like the full story would be developing. And then as I got older and I got past that, the writing would happen more independently of the art. So I would just sit down and I'd be writing. Sometimes I'd go running. Like that's a big thing for me. Physical movement triggers my imagination. And there's a technical reason for that. I won't go into that because that would take like this interview would be like 2 hours if I nerded out on all those aspects. But so I work out and I write, and then I go and I like write in my head, and then I will sit down at the keyboard and essentially record everything that happened. And then as I'm writing on the page, the dialogues, get better and there's more description. And then I will draw the characters separately. And so they become separate. Unfortunately, now I think I've gotten to a point where I do so much corporate work and illustration work for different companies that I don't think I spend as much time doing the Centuria art anymore. And I want to get back to it, which is why, Sarah, when I was looking at your project and you were like, I'm doing the thing 14-year-old me would have wanted. Like that was the phrase I saw again and again on Facebook. And that like totally hit me. I'm like, I need to do more Centuria art because that's what 14-year-old me would have wanted, but there's only enough hours in the day. Going back to your original questions, Sparrow, for me, they're intertwined and I've never been able to separate them, and nor would I want to. Like the art and the written word are together in my mind for the Centuria project.
So it's super interesting to hear how you're like always like you have like a blend. So for me, it was writing was added on. So I was an artist first, but I was always decent at writing. So like I was good I was good at writing papers in school and, any sort of reports in school. And there was one assignment, I want to say I was like, I don't know, maybe in 9th grade. And they said like, oh, can you redo a Greek myth? Like take Greek myth and just put your spin on it. And that was an assignment. And I really took to it. I was like, oh, that was kind of cool. It was fun. And then, I was like, cool, let's forget about that entirely. Go to college, and I did art. And a lot of my creatures were just like, that was it. It was just like, this is the form and this is the creature. And that was it. But then as you start getting like really, really into that almost starts to generate a little bit of a story. And then, actually, this will bring me into my concept of my second life. So I got ridiculously hurt in my late 20s. Like both my arms and both my legs got hurt really, really bad. And I couldn't really walk. I couldn't hold a pencil. I couldn't cook food. And then after a lot of rehab, around my early 30s, like 31, 32, I was better. And it was sort of like a big time wake up call for me, because like I was like, wow, that's really fragile. Like life is really, really fragile. And I almost lost the ability to do everything I love. And I'm a huge weightlifter. I like running, I like creating, and all of that I lost for tops 2 years, solid 2 years. And I was like, okay, so you have your arms and legs back. What are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to make creature art. And I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know how to make it into a career. So that's when I started looking into how to make that into a career. That led me to take that Storyteller Summit class with the Oatly Academy. And they were like, you need to make a personal project. Okay, cool. And they're like, we're going to teach you how to do that. And I came on that was the Panama story for me. And because of that, they taught me to start writing for my art. And that was like the first time that I was like, oh, so this can be like pictures and a book, and pictures and a story. And then that that class taught me how important it is for stories to be connected to pictures in order to connect with people, because people connect so deeply with stories and everything. So it was very much so an evolution into artist plus writer. And now that I do both, it does kind of happen a little bit simultaneously, but I will say it's usually like art first, then story, and I weave it in that way. However, I will say, making posts on social media, a lot of people discount that for the importance of learning to write well, or at least be able to express your thoughts in a way that most people will understand. And that's one of the reasons that I write on social media as much as I do, is because it's kind of constant practice for, can I convey a message in the way that I wanted to convey it, so the majority of the people understand what I'm trying to say. And high school writing that I was taught was very formal, a little bit verbose, and a lot of people were missing the mark. So I've been told that my writing style is generally like, I don't have a lot of fluff in how I write my stories, because I want it to kind of be, here's the main point and here's all the things. And so everyone understands and we're all on the same page. So if you're looking to start writing, I would say social media is a fantastic and a little bit brutal testing ground to, can you write in a way that people nowadays will understand? And that's a good way to start too. But yeah, going back to your question, I was definitely a writer first, then an artist first, then a writer, and now I do both.